everyone, it's Seji and welcome to Otaku Field Notes episode 3. I am not giving up on this. I won't let this podcast die. So I actually filmed episode 3, the original episode 3, a couple of days after doing so for episode 2. And then when I was editing, I found out that the audio was corrupt. And so I had to reshoot it, but I had like so many exams and projects that I didn't have the time. But now I have 2 months off from uni, so I'm just really looking forward to just being able to make videos for YouTube. So we'll see how Otaku Field Notes will go in the coming weeks. Okay, so first I wanted to talk about Netflix. So I've been watching a couple of shows on there since I think about April or so. I started off with High Rise Invasion and then went on to The Way of the House Husband. I was kind of like fired up by The Way of the House Husband, the anime, because I was just really disappointed. I've spoken about this already, but yeah, it was a good lesson for me to, or at least a good reminder, I guess, is a better way to put it, that I shouldn't have expectations when it comes to adaptations. So I think it's because, with manga or with literature, right, you're reading, if you read the source material, with manga in particular, you have only the stills, and so in your mind, consciously or subconsciously, you're kind of like imagining how it would be like if it was animated. And the same with literature, you read something and like you have an idea of the characters, the scenery, etc., etc. And the moment when your kind of like imaginary version of the anime and the actual realization of the anime are so far divorced, then sometimes you'll get disappointed. And I don't like that feeling, so I'm going to try and keep that in mind. Yes, but I'll get to that later in a couple of shows. I first wanted to talk about Yasuke, and I had no expectations with this one because I didn't know that it existed until it was out. And like going into that anime, the only thing that I knew was that it was based on the story of Yasuke, supposedly the first black samurai, I believe. I looked it up on Wikipedia. Apparently he was a retainer of a daimyo lord of the 1500s, something like that. So yeah, I went in there thinking that it would be a historical fiction, and so I watch episode 1 and the first thing I see is 1, robots, and 2, magicians. So I'm already thinking like, okay, so it's a historical fiction with mecha and fantasy. That's kind of a lot in one thing. And so I was like, okay, I'll just watch it and see how it goes. So to give you a short synopsis on the show, it's about Yasuke, or rather supposedly about Yasuke. So we start off with seeing him in a room with his lord, and his lord is committing seppuku. So Yasuke decides to flee, and he finds this town where he ends up becoming a fisherman, and he stays there for a very long time, essentially becoming a local. Now all of a sudden there's this young girl in the town who is ill. Apparently she has powers that are starting to manifest, and if she doesn't find this doctor that is somewhere in Japan, then she'll succumb to her powers. And so her mother asks Yasuke to take them via the river to meet this doctor, and Yasuke is kind of like, nah, not really my problem, which fair enough. But they eventually, like, I guess, convince him to, take them along. And so that's how he gets put in the center of this complete mess, because apparently there is this evil Christian guy who wants to abduct this girl and take her powers so he can get closer to God or something like that. And so he has hired 4 people to, abduct her. So this is already a lot. And you're thinking like, okay, so it's about Yasuke, right? Why is the emphasis kind of like on retrieving this girl, and why doesn't Yasuke really want to be a part of this? Well, I couldn't tell you because I don't know, like the story really was about this girl, and there are so many nonsensical things happening throughout. For the people who want to watch this, I'm not going to spoil things, but there are just so many things that seem to be important at the start of the show, but are just discarded towards the end. Like, it's like it was written by 2 different people and they just said, screw whatever the first guy did, I'm gonna do my own thing. That's a lot how it felt like. Then, second of all, the characters were really bland. There was no personality, especially those 4 contractors. One of them was a robot, and they were making jokes like, beep, boop, boop, beep, calculating percentage, I am funny, 0%, which is just like, oh, please, someone unplug this robot. Find the switch it off. It was so cringy. I also forgot to mention the vast amount of lame ass black jokes. It was always something like, he's a samurai, but he's black. Ha ha ha. And then you had this stereotype of, Eastern Russian woman who could like turn into a bear and who was like really strong and just really bland. Everything was very predictable. I don't know, it was I will give you like an example of like the many plot holes that were there. So like I said, Yasuke is taking this girl with her mother on the river. He's taking them to the doctor, and they get ambushed by these 4 contractors. The girl freaks out, and so she, explodes. She has this type of power explosion that hits everyone, and all of a sudden her mother is gone. And so she and Yasuke start looking for the mother, and they're like, well, we can't find her. And throughout the season, I was just thinking like, okay, they're gonna find her some way, somehow. And it just never gets addressed. And I'm like, the actual main character's mother just gets blasted by her, and no one's really gonna mention it again. Like, the girl is also kind of like okay with her mother being gone. It was just really weird. I will say though that the music was kind of fire, so yeah, that's all I have to say for Yasuke, I think. Then after that, actually, last thing I wanted to say about Yasuke actually. So if you look at the anime, there are 6 episodes, but there are 2 arcs. How are you going to fit 2 arcs into half an anime season? That's just already a recipe for disaster. Okay, rant is over. I'm moving to the next show, which is Castlevania. And oh my gosh, season 4, I believe, the final season anyway. So good. I love everything about Castlevania. And in the time that I was, waiting for the final season to drop, I've just been rewatching the other seasons, and it just keeps getting better and better. So for those who don't really know what Castlevania is, just to give you like a short synopsis, it's centered in Eastern Europe, in Wallachia, I think, is that a city or a town? Anyway, Eastern Europe, and it's about vampires, vampire hunters, and all sorts of sorcerers and fantasy creatures. And the biggest themes are love, revenge, and the need for power, essentially. So yeah, because I really don't want to spoil it, because it's so good to experience it on your own. Everything is just good. The writing is amazing. I felt like, because I think when you're looking at an anime or whatever story, like, there's so many series that have a good start and a good middle but mess up the end. Castlevania is solid throughout all seasons. It's so good. The character development is amazing, and yeah, that is actually the thing that I like the most about this series, because there are so many characters and a lot of them do like really bad stuff, but you also get to learn about their history, how they became the person that they are now, and you understand their motives. And so, it's very hard to like really hate anyone in the series, if that makes any sense. And that's something that I really love about shows that are good. I mean, that's a thing to me that makes the show good, that even like the worst people who do like the most atrocious stuff, that you can still find that humanity, that's still that thing that makes you be able to empathize with them. And yeah, it's just a great show. My favorite character is Alucard, and literally just 2 weeks ago I found out that is just spelled backwards Dracula. So I felt kind of silly finding that out just recently, but maybe some of you didn't know that either. So yes, this is a hard yes. I would highly recommend you check out Castlevania, especially if you're someone who likes horror. The gore is really good, the adventure is amazing, and the animation is so good as well. One thing I like as well about it is, like the action scenes, the style of animation changes often, and so in the action scenes everything becomes very fluid and loose, and it's just really nice to have that difference as well, that artistic choice of doing that, especially in the final battle scene. I thought that was amazing. So good. And so it feels also kind of like sad that I have to say goodbye to these characters, because there were so many of them I was rooting for, some who were happy with their lives and were able to who had kind of like a definitive goodbye. But I think there's going to be a spin-off. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out and like about who it's going to be, but I'm up for it. If it's the same type of team that is working on it, I am definitely keeping my eyes peeled. Okay, and having said that, we should move on to Record of Ragnarok. Am I saying this correctly, or am I just pulling this out of my ass right now? Because I know there was something about Valkyries as well. Record of Ragnarok. Yeah, I was right. So the English name is Record of Ragnarok, but the Japanese one is Shumatsu no Warukure. So Valkyrie of the End. Okay, so this is again, like, why do I keep making the same mistake? I had expectations here. Granted, not as high as The Way of the House Husband, but even these were not met, unfortunately. So, Record of Ragnarok essentially is a story that starts with all these gods from different countries and cultures. They are in a conference and they are deciding if they should let humanity continue to live on. And people are kind of like sick of humans, with reason, if I'm being honest. So they're just like, okay, let's just wipe them all away. And so there's this Valkyrie who is, I believe, half god, half human. And she says like, so you are going to eradicate all humans without even giving them a chance to defend themselves? And they're like, ha ha ha, they're just pitiful human beings. And she's like, well, I think you are all just really scared. And so in that way, she manages to start like ragnarok, which is, so this is like a battle, 13 battles between gods and humans. And so the race or the type of person, the group, the first group to have 7 wins, wins. And so if the humans win, then they get to live another, I think, like 10,000 years. If the gods win, then it's lights out for humans, essentially. And so, yeah, that's what the show is about. So you have these, like, the greatest warriors in human history fighting against, these gods. So, for instance, you have Adam from Adam and Eve. You have Liu Bo or Bo Liu, I don't know the correct name, this Mongolian warrior, I believe. You also have Jack the Ripper, etc, etc. You get the gist, essentially. So, from my description, you would think that this is a battle manga, which it is. And so you would expect that the anime would have scenes of people fighting, which it doesn't. Not really. Because this was like the most this was the most lackluster battle anime that I have ever seen. Like, the battles were so bad. It was literally just, like, you have those scenes when the character is like, ah, and like you have in the background those lines in the background, like, moving, and it seems like they're going fast. You had those scenes, and then the two characters, like, I don't know, touching swords or whatever. And that was it. And that was it. There was literally nothing else. I was like, where's the action? And so I watched like the first 4 episodes. I think that was the first match. And it was just a lot of like talking about the history of the gods, talking about the history of the specific human. I think it was Liu Bo against Thor. Not Thor, yes, Thor with his hammer. And I personally think it's really interesting, to hear about that type of history. But I came here for the battles, right? And I think most people came here for the battles, and it was so lackluster and just really disappointing. Yeah, I was just really, this is something I never do, but I sped it up on Netflix. I put it on, I think, 1.5 speed, and it still felt so incredibly boring. So I feel like at this point, Netflix is really hit or miss at the moment. And that's everything I have for now. I know there's this other one that came out back in May, I believe, or June, about this girl and who was like raised by robots or something. And I haven't really heard all that many good things about it, but I'll see for myself. I'm not too sure when I'll be watching that. Nevertheless, spring 2021, I had the idea that I would be watching the first episode of all the shows and then see which ones I'll be watching weekly and which ones I would binge. And then I was too busy, and so that happened, and so I actually didn't watch any of these in real time. But I'm now kind of like getting to it. The first series I wanted to talk about, Shadow's House. So the magazine in which Shadow's House is published in is the same one as Golden Kamui, because I was on the website and I was just kind of like going through what the magazine had to offer, and I saw Shadow's House about a year ago or something, and I checked the Wikipedia page and there wasn't really all that much on the show, except that it would be getting an anime adaptation. So I was like, okay, that sounds cool, because I looked at the cover art and it just showed this girl with a black silhouette, and so I was kind of intrigued. I wanted to know what it was all about, and so I watched the first episode a couple of weeks ago, essentially when it came out first, and not that much happened, so I felt like it could really go either way. And so I binged everything yesterday and it was so good. So the story essentially is set in this huge house mansion called Shadow's House, in which the nobility, the so-called shadows, live. And so these shadows are essentially, I think, beings that are continuously emitting coal, especially when they have negative feelings. And so they have all these servants who are consistently cleaning after them, and so they are called living dolls, and each shadow has a living doll. These are beings that look like humans and who are supposed to act as their face, essentially, so that they can essentially just go around and interact with people, and then you have their living doll expressing how they feel, like angry or happy or sad. And so it's it's a really weird but also very cool concept, in my opinion. And so the story actually is this really cool mystery, because there are so many questions about, okay, where are these living dolls coming from? What are these shadow people exactly? Who is the guy at the top? What is happening? What's going on, essentially? And so you follow this pair, Emeriko or Emeliko and Kate. Kate is a shadow and Emeliko is her living doll, and their relationship seems to be a bit different than what is expected of a shadow and a living doll, because essentially, these living dolls are supposed to be seen as servants without personality. They are supposed to be the face of these shadows, but Kate wants Emeliko to be her own person, her own human being. And that's kind of like what the show is all about, them finding out, because a lot of the stuff that we don't know that is going on, Kate doesn't know about either. And so that's kind of like what the series is about. And so season 1 is centered around the so-called debut. So in this huge mansion, there is this very interesting social structure. One side of the mansion is where all of the kids reside, so the children's wing, and then you have the other side where the grown-up nobility lives. And the way that place is structured is that you have the first floor, second floor, and the third floor. And the higher up you go, the higher you rank as nobility. The third floor is the highest, where you have what they call the master grandfather, something like that, who is the leader of the entire nobility. And so there's this huge power struggle of being able to get to the third floor in order for you as a child to, I guess, survive long enough in order to get to that other side of the mansion. You need to go through what is called a debut, and this is a challenge where you as a shadow have to survive together with your living doll. It's this whole quest thing. And so this is already the first sort of situation where we get to see this power struggle, this hunger for, you know, getting to the top of essentially the food chain. There's this one guy, Edward, on the second floor who wants to get to the third floor, and so he is in charge of the debut in which Kate and Emilico are partaking. And the thing is with the entire debut is that Edward essentially is just trying to, I guess, impress the higher ups, and so he has to make it as entertaining as possible. And so he wants people to feel the debut, and that's kind of like what's going on in the first season. It's really interesting. We get introduced to the main characters. Of course, you have Kate and Emilico, but you also have a handful of other shadows and their living dolls who partake in the debut and who are also part of the main cast. And yeah, it was just like such a fun season, and there's still so many secrets that I really want to get to the bottom of. Also, one thing that I really like about this show as well is I was looking at Mal and I saw that all the shadows and the living dolls have the same voice actor or actress except Kate and Emilico, which is really fun because the whole I don't know, like one of the biggest parts of the show is that Kate really wants Emilico to be her own self, and so having like a different voice actress is also, I guess, a reflection of that. It's just like a tiny quirky thing, but I thought it was worth mentioning. What else? Yeah, the characters are so good. Like, of course you have like Edward, who at least in this season is the main villain, and even though he's like really bad, I still kind of like him as a villain. I like that he's the villain. With the other characters, one thing that I really liked for myself personally was how the pace of liking them was different for each one, if that makes any sense. So you have this pair, Patrick and Ricky, who at first like seem so self-absorbed and very much like, I have to get to my goal and I don't care who I have to step on. And so initially I was like, ugh, this is like such like an annoying character. But throughout the first season you see them, you know, get more of a personality, and you know, I just can't help liking them now. And it's the same for essentially all of these child main characters. It's just a great show and I would highly recommend it. So I haven't binged any other shows, so I figured it wouldn't really be worth like talking about the first episodes of some of these, because yeah, it's been a while since I watched them, so my memory is a bit, I guess, foggy. But shows that I'm really planning to watch soon are Odd Taxi, Mashiro no Oto, which is Those Snow White Noises, then 86, Tokyo Revengers, and like the Vivi one that I spoke about last episode. Yeah, I am gonna hold off of To Your Eternity just because I think it has 20 episodes, so I figured I'd just wait an extra 2 months and just watch everything, because I know the show is going to break me and I would just like to get over the heartbreak in just one go rather than having to return to it every single week. So as for summer 2021, 2 days ago I started going through the first couple of episodes, and one of them was Kanojo mo Kanojo, and I had the manga, I believe, ready for a couple of months, and I started reading it back in, I think, May or something. So I already knew what this was going to be about. So Kanojo mo Kanojo is like the weirdest harem series that there is. So you have this guy who is actually quite bland, and he has this childhood friend who he has been in love with for a really long time, and so he would always confess to her saying, you know, I want you to be my girlfriend, and she had been rejecting him for years up until one moment when she was like, okay, yes, I'll date you. And so he's happy, he loves her a lot. And then one day, after dating for I think like a couple of weeks or so, he's on the rooftop and this girl just comes at him and she's like, I want to confess to you, I love you. And so she spent like a couple of months like getting in shape, making sure she can cook and stuff like that, so that he couldn't resist her. And he can't, of course, but he already has a girlfriend, and so he comes up with the brilliant and obvious idea to make this girl ask his girlfriend for them to both date him. Yeah, so that's what the show is about. Girlfriend number one really likes this girl. Like they spend an entire day and she's like, oh my gosh, she's so cute, I want to date her. And so he was like, well, actually, I want to date the both of you. And of course his girlfriend is not happy with it, but they come to a compromise and then they start living together. Yeah. They start living together, and yeah, that's essentially what this series is about. I'm pretty sure that 2 other girls will be added to this, and then I'm guessing they're all living together and are trying to make things work. And the issue that I have with this show is that it is entirely not funny. It is very predictable, and the characters are incredibly bland. Like the main character, the guy, like I can't even like remember the names of these characters. The main character, the guy, he literally has no personality at all, and I think he's supposed to kind of like function as a self-insert, and I already don't really like this type of series, especially when it comes to these type of realities of dating multiple girls, because that's something that I don't fantasize about. And so having a main character that is so bland, who is supposed to, I guess, represent you as a reader, is just not it for me. That's also another thing that comes tied into that, is that all these girls are so obsessed with him, but they don't even give like a reason for it. They're like, oh my gosh, he's the one that I wanted for my entire life, I'm willing to share him, he's the best. And I'm like, literally, what about him is so amazing? He's a default character. It's literally girls pining over a default character, and the way the humor in the anime is conveyed is a lot of like, and just a lot of like being surprised and shouting because of the entire situation. And yeah, I don't know, I just think that I'm not really the target audience for this anime, and you know, that's fine, I'm okay. There's more anime in this sea, which brings me to one of like the best ones I've seen in a while. And I don't know, I might be in the minority here, but I keep forgetting the name. I think it's uramichi oniisan. Wait, let me check this out. Yeah, it is. Oh my gosh, I did get it right. Yes, it's Uramichi oniisan, and this show is so funny. I would highly recommend it to you, especially if you're someone who really likes dark comedy. So Uramichi oniisan is about a kids television show, kind of like Barney's. So you have these kids that come in to do activities, and you have these 5 adults who play different types of characters. Some play as themselves, and 2 others play as a bunny and a bear, so they're always in these type of mascot costumes. So so you're thinking, okay, like how is this like a mature anime? So the main characters are actually kind of really depressed. And that's kind of like what the show is about, especially the guy called Uramichi. So he used to be an athlete. He went to like a sports, I believe, education type of college, and he was like really good. He was one of the elites there. And now 10 years later, he's been doing this kids television show for a very long time, and it has essentially drained him of all his dreams and aspirations, and he's just become a very cynical human being, which I think a lot of us can really relate to. And so when he's doing this show, when he's interacting with these kids, you kind of like get to see his two faces. So one of the first scenes in the first episode, you have Uramichi like, okay kids, who is really excited? And everyone goes like, yay! And then he's like, and who is just really happy to be here? Yeah! And then he's like, and who is not excited at all and doesn't want to do anything today? Yeah. And that's kind of like how the show is in a nutshell. It's a lot of like quickly switching from acting like you're really happy to actually feeling completely miserable. And I think that a lot of people can relate. At least I hope so, because I can really relate to that. You know, I think it's just this whole thing about like being an adult and coming to the realization like how shitty it can be very often. The show is really all about like how sometimes when you grow up, you, I guess, kind of like lose that happiness from your childhood. Oh my gosh, that sounds so bad. But you know, like when you're an adult, you like a lot of times you really have to do some really shitty things. I can't really put it in another way, because like for instance I don't want to like go too much into this, but I mean I've worked like a corporate job previously, and I can tell you it really does feel like like this show is like a bit too much. So yeah, Uramichi oniisan, please watch this. It's really my kind of humor. And by the way, it's not only Uramichi who has like this type of issue. The other adults have their own type of complex. For instance, one of them is a woman who is, I think, like 32, and she has been living together with her boyfriend, who is an not very liked comedian, for 6 years. And she just kind of like, you know, feels a bit stuck. All of her peers are getting married, and she's kind of like in this job, not really, you know, moving forward as people would traditionally expect, like, you know, getting married and having kids and stuff like that. You have another guy who is really pretty and a good singer, but he is just a complete airhead. Just very different types of characters, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, yeah, getting to know them. I'm pretty sure I'll also try and get my hands on the manga. I think it will be really fun to read as well. The third episode that I watched was like Tante wa mou shindeiru. Something like the detective is already dead. I believe it's a light novel, and as the title states, it's about a detective, and she meets this guy. He becomes her assistant, this guy in secondary school, and yeah, they have a great time, I think for like 4 years together solving crimes. And then all of a sudden this girl, the detective, dies, and so he is the assistant is having a hard time getting over that, and so he tries to return to his normal life as just someone in secondary school, and then someone shows up who looks exactly like the old detective. And I watched half of the first episode. The first episode is like 47 minutes long, and I don't know, it didn't really it wasn't very interesting. The first episode is about a plane hijacking with some guy who has some mutation or something, and it didn't really catch my attention all that much, so I kind of dropped it off. So I don't think I'm gonna continue with that, but do tell me if it gets interesting at some point. And I think that's about everything for summer 2021 for now. I will be watching more stuff in the coming couple of days, so yeah, we'll see. Then I also watched Urasekai Picnic, and I think this is from winter 2021. It's supposed to be a shoujo-ai fantasy about this girl who can go through doors to different worlds or dimensions, and there she meets this other girl who does the same thing, and so yeah, they go on adventures in other worlds. And I came in thinking that this was gonna be shoujo-ai because that was one of the tags. And I guess you could say it was shoujo-ai, the main character. She clearly seems to like the other main character, but it's only a couple of thoughts in her mind. And so I think there are 12 episodes altogether. Nothing in terms of relationship ever happens. And so, yeah, I don't know. I've forgotten about most of it. I wrote down in my notes, kind of boring. I didn't like the main character, which is true. She is really bland. So just to kind of give you the dynamic between the main character. Okay, so there are two main characters. One of them, you kind of it's from their perspective. You get to see everything. And she's the girl with black short hair, and then you have this other girl with long blonde hair who she meets in one of these worlds essentially. So the reason the blonde girl is in these worlds is because she is looking for her partner. She actually had a partner for a while, but at some point she got lost in one of these worlds, and so the blonde girl is trying to get her back essentially, and the black-haired girl doesn't really like that. Why? I think she's just really jealous because she's why is this girl obsessing about her? Why am I even here? Why am I trying to help? Blah 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 blah. She only complains the entire time. So yeah, there was not that much there wasn't any romance, let's be honest. The animation was okay. There was a bit of goofy CGI at some places, but it was fine. It was just kind of a bummer that there wasn't any romance, because I was expecting romance again with the expectations, but it's fine. Then I also watched this horror anime called Alice in Deadly School. It's about a group of schoolgirls who are stuck on the higher levels of their school building because there is a zombie outbreak, and that's about it, I'd say. I can't really remember too much about it, so but one thing I did remember was this very silly moment where you had this group of people who were trying to, I guess, save these girls. So instead of landing on the roof, they landed on the ground floor, and so they got overrun by zombies, and so the helicopter exploded, and it was just why? Why would you do that? Clearly you can see that these zombies are gathering, trying to, essentially waiting there to welcome you. Why would you land there? It just didn't make any sense. But yeah, it seems that it was supposed to be a movie in a movie, or a performance inside an anime. I'm not too sure. I tried to look up exactly like what this franchise is all about and how it works, but I couldn't really understand that. Might go and look that up during editing. We'll see. Okay. Next up, I have a hidden gem for you, and it's from Murata Tomoyasu, and it's called A Branch of a Pine is Tied Up. And Tomoyasu is actually known for making stop motion, which for the most part center around the nuclear disaster and the aftermath of that from, like, I believe like a decade ago. And this one is no different. It's about two girls, a pair of twins, and only one of them survives the disaster. And so the stop motion is about their life before the disaster and then afterwards. I don't really know all that much about it because it's stop motion and there aren't any voices, so certain scenes are a bit difficult to understand because also they're twins, and so it was hard for me to sometimes, I guess, like understand exactly what was going on. But nevertheless, I thought it was very interesting, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. I'll definitely be giving it another go sometime soon to just get more out of it. And yeah, it is up for free on the NHK website until March 13th, 2022. So yeah, there is like a time limit if anyone's wondering. Now, besides all of the newer stuff, I also watched some older anime, namely ONIISAMA, or Brother Dear Brother in English, and this is a classic shoujo anime from the 90s, which ran for, I believe, about a year or so, and it has 39 episodes. If you're interested in watching it, by the way, you can do so on YouTube. I'll leave a link to the playlist. Anyway, yeah, classic shoujo anime. It's an adaptation of one of Ryoko Ikeda's manga series. You may know Ikeda from The Rose of Versailles and Claudine as well. And yeah, this was quite interesting. So it centers around this girl named Nanako. Right before she goes to high school, she is following tutor lessons from this university student, and on their last day she runs up to him and asks him like, hey, this is kind of weird, but would you like to be my brother so that I can send you letters about my experiences? And he's nice enough, and so he agrees. And that's kind of like the structure of this anime. So you have the main character, Nanako, narrating her life at this all-girls high school in the form of letters, which is why it's called Dear Brother. Yeah, it's about an entire school year, and a lot happens. There are loads and loads of characters with their own issues and problems, and I won't really go too much into those because yeah, there's just a lot of mystery around it, and that's kind of like what really kept me going, because I wanted to know the relationships that these characters all had between one another, because Nanako didn't know any of these people before she went to the high school, and a lot of the characters, a lot of like the main reoccurring characters are students who have already been at that school for quite some time, so they already have a shared history. And so yeah, it was very interesting to watch. It is also shoujo-ai, which is also very interesting because you don't really see that many shoujo-ai series. So I think it would be very interesting to do like a single video review on it, although I still kind of like need to wrap my head around everything that happens, because there's just so much going on in the show. And yeah, I think I think it's always kind of like interesting to look at how different topics get, I guess, how would you say that, get treated in certain types of media, if that makes any sense. I mean, I don't, because like what I'm gonna say might spoil the anime. So yeah, I think it would be an interesting topic for like a single review video. I think in general it's very interesting to explore both sexuality and gender in anime, manga. I think that's just for me personally, because I'm just really interested in also like the older shoujo manga, shoujo anime. So yeah, we'll see what I'll what I'll get up to. The last thing that I wanted to mention about this series is the unique style of animations. Like, it's like the show is so typically shoujo in the way it's very dramatic. Like, for instance, they have a lot of stills in their anime where you kind of like, you know, have the traditional type of animation, but then, I don't know, something dramatic happens. Someone, I don't know, falls or something. And like the entire art style just changes into more of a traditional, I would say, like pencil, and it's just really dramatic. And the music, and I'm doing a horrible job of explaining this, or there are moments where the background goes completely white, like white light, like you're in heaven type of stuff. It's just very, very interesting. I do have to say, it's also quite cool to see it from a perspective that's like 30 years later, the way it has aged. And I think it would be very interesting to compare it to the shoujo ai that is here at the moment. I don't know really how to put this into words, but I just think it's very interesting. For me, just in general, when it comes to manga and anime, I think it's just really cool to look at all these different types of, I guess, these kind of like nooks and crannies that are out there that haven't really been explored all that much, and places where there isn't all that much interest, if that makes any sense. It makes me feel like, I don't know, like I'm discovering, which I'm not really. I'm not discovering anything new, but for myself, I'm discovering something new, and hopefully for other people as well, which is why I make these videos. Yeah, okay, enough of that. Moving on to some manga. So I actually read Tono Monogatari by Shigeru Mizuki, and you might know Mizuki from Gegege no Kitaro, which is kind of like this kids horror manga. I mean, Mizuki passed away about 6 years ago and left a host of really interesting manga, which I'm looking to read in the future. So this is actually the first piece of his that I've read, and Tono Monogatari is actually an adaptation of a book filled with folktales called Tono Monogatari, and these stories are from this place, I think in northern Japan, this town called Tono. Like in the early 20th century, there was this guy who felt that due to the industrialization of Japan was losing a lot of its culture, and so he wanted to preserve that, and so he traveled from, I think, Tokyo to Tono to go and meet with these people from this village so that he could collect the tales that used to be only passed down orally. And yeah, that book was one of the many literary influences from Mizuki, and so he decided to make an adaptation of that later in life. And the way it kind of like goes is that he has also self-inserted him into the story. It's as if he goes to Tono and encounters these stories, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I asked for a review copy from Drawn and Quarterly, which is a Canadian like comic book publisher. They do a lot of like alternative stuff, like not like your regular Shonen Jump or whatever. Yeah, I would highly recommend you check it out. It's pretty good. Yeah. So one other thing that I'm looking to read from Izuki is actually some non-fiction where he talks about the Second World War. In general, I have just been trying to look at more non-fiction manga, and that kind of like smoothly brings me to the next person I actually wanted to talk about, and that is Nagata Kabi. So I made a review about 2 or 3 years ago about her book. Wait, where is it? Here. Yeah, My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness. And this is a manga in which Kabi talks about her life and, yeah, her kind of trying to explore her sexuality, but also her relationship with her parents, her family, etc. And the story really resonated with me. Like a lot of the experiences that Kabi has had, I haven't had, but there was just something very relatable and something very human, very raw about the story that really struck a chord with me, and I appreciated it. I still do appreciate this piece a lot. So yeah, if you're interested in the review that I did on it, I'll leave a link in the description box. But yeah, after that I read My Solo Exchange Diary, and this is kind of like, yeah, an exchange diary with herself. So she would write an entry and then write to future Kabi, and then the next time she would respond and then write to future Kabi. And yeah, there are 2 volumes out now, also very, very good, would highly recommend. Now this one doesn't really have such a specific topic as Kabi's first manga, but it deals kind of like just with her life in general, trying to live on her own and dealing with the success of her first manga, because apparently my lesbian experience with loneliness was incredibly popular in Japan. So yeah, these 2 deal with that as well as kind of like her dating life. So yeah, I thought this was really interesting. Also relate very much to trying to live alone, because I've had a lot of difficulties with that in the past, and like having to move back in again, and now doing much better, which is good. And then quite recently her 4th piece came out called My Alcoholic Escape from Reality. This is the Japanese version of it. The Japanese English title is called Is a Story of Me Trying to Escape from Reality Just to Be Worn Out. And this, like the Solo Exchange Diary, kind of like preluded to her excessive amount of drinking. And this manga actually starts with her getting hospitalized for her excessive drinking. I believe she got acute pancreatitis and a fatty liver, and so she is forced to stay in the hospital for quite some time actually in order to recover. So that's what this book is all about, and also about trying to find what to write about, because in the first 3 of her manga she was extremely frank and spoke about her parents, about her family in quite a negative way, and her family eventually found out like which manga was hers, and after having read it they were incredibly hurt. And so in that time she tries to amend the relationship that she has with her parents. And so yeah, this book is also about her trying to figure out how to do her work being a manga artist whilst not hurting her family in the process. So this one was also quite good, in my opinion, very good. And then her latest non-fiction piece is The Wandering Warrior, this one, and I think it came out a couple of months back in the Japanese. It got licensed by Seven Seas again, and it will be coming out, I think, March 2022, and this is all about her trying to find love. So yeah, I haven't started on this. It might take me a while because I was trying to read this one in Japanese, but it got a bit hard because also, like, you know, they're dealing with a lot of technical terms with all the pancreatitis and all the medical stuff, so it was a bit too hard for me to read, but hopefully this one will go a bit better. And I've been thinking about, you know, making a video about kabi and non-fiction manga, I think, in general, because it's a really interesting genre, in my opinion. I've never really been one to read a lot of memoirs, but I found that I like the ones that are rather short, and manga is pretty short. I've also read this one by, what's her name again, Tove Ditlevsen, who was a Danish poet, and the first part of her memoir was like 100 pages and very short but very good. And so yeah, I think manga is like a great medium for non-fiction as well. So actually, Kabi did an interview, an English interview. Well, she didn't speak English, but she had her translator, Jocelyn Allen, who also, I should note, translated all these. Translated these four as well. Yeah, they did an interview where she spoke about her latest book, or at least her latest translated book, about the other previous books and just her life, which was really interesting. And I was a bit distraught because I found out that she had done this interview, I think about like 3 weeks after she had done it, and it was on YouTube, but it got privated, so I didn't have any access to it. But the day when I was looking for it, literally 5 hours prior to that, someone had uploaded the interview, re-uploaded it, and so I was really thankful. So I was able to have a watch, and I thought it was really nice. It was very insightful to her work, and I'm actually looking forward to reading also some of her fiction if she ends up getting that published as well. So that's everything for Kabi. Hopefully you'll see me talking about her work again soon. Then I also started reading Asadora by Naoki Urasawa, who you may know from Monster, 20th Century Boys, Pluto, Manben. I really do like Urasawa. I have watched quite a couple of the Manben episodes. So Manben is actually a Japanese show where Urasawa goes and meets a mangaka, and they go over footage that has been recorded, I think, over a couple of days at their studio, and they kind of like go over their process as a manga artist. And that's really interesting. I used some of the information as well for my year 24 group video about Moto Hagyo, which was really cool. I've also just really gotten into Moto Hagyo's work recently, so I might be talking about that more in the podcast. But yeah, Urasawa seems like such a nice guy, such a cool guy. I haven't really read much of his work, but I really do like his style. And I found out a couple of weeks ago that he actually now has a YouTube channel, which is really cool, where he kind of like is trying to post more casual videos. And he said that he also planned to interview some younger manga artists, which I think is really cool and could help with exposure as well for them. So I think that that's also very awesome. But yeah, he's just a very prominent figure within the manga industry, and so I think it's really cool the way he is always trying to reach a new audience. Having said that, I started reading Asadora, so I got a couple of volumes from Viz digitally to review. And I think it's quite interesting. I'm not too sure what Asadora is all about because I've only read 2 volumes and I'm still a bit confused. It starts off in Tokyo 2020 and the city is on fire. So it's kind of like, okay, what's happening here? But then it quickly switches to Nagoya 1959 during the Typhoon Vera. And yeah, we follow this girl named Asa who is part of this huge family with like 10 plus kids, and so nobody really like knows her name. They confuse her with her other sisters, etc, etc. But anyway, it's time for her mother to give birth again, and so she is sent to get the doctor for the delivery. And so yeah, she gets the doctor, but she kind of like gets into this weird situation where this weird goofy guy and her get stuck in like a freight crate, like those huge metallic stuff, and all of a sudden stuff is happening outside and the crate is moving everywhere, and then it stops and they get out and they see that just the entire place is flooded. And so Asa immediately fears for her family, and so she and the guy, they manage to get a hold of a plane, and so they start flying above the city trying to see if they can save people, if they can find Asa's family. And yeah, at some point the man who has been steering the airplane, he can't do it anymore, and so Asa has to take over the steering wheel, and so she starts flying the plane with his instructions. And fast forward years later, the guy and her have started this company called Asa, where Asa essentially does all these plane tricks, and that's as far as I've gotten. So I don't really know what to say at the moment. It looks really interesting. It's very quirky in my opinion. It seems like there's some mystery going on, which I won't really go into as of now. So yeah, I don't really have all that much to say other than that it's looking quite promising. Was feeling a bit ill, took a nap, feeling better now. Let's get back to the manga. So yes, Mieruko-chan. This is volume 1. I bought this back in August last year, and yeah, I said I was going to read it and I don't think I ever reviewed it. So Mieruko-chan is a manga, a sort of horror comedy, I think you could call it. Also, it is getting an anime adaptation, I think later this year or the next. But it's about this girl called Mieruko, and the kanji here is for seeing, miru. So yeah, it's kind of like being able to see, mieru. Yeah, she has the ability to see all these weird ghouls, and instead of just, you know, reacting and being scared, she just tries to ignore them and hopes that if they don't notice that she can see them, that they will just leave her alone. The only thing is that she finds way too many of these ghouls everywhere, haunting her friend as well, and so she tries her best to just survive. So that's kind of like the premise of this show or series. I do have to say there's nothing too particularly like remarkable about this series, if I'm being quite frank. There is a bit of fan service, which at this point for me is kind of like, ugh, whatever. But yeah, I've read, I believe, 3 or 4 volumes of this one, and I don't really see a lot of progress being made in terms of like, I feel that this is going to be a gag horror manga, and that you're not going to see a lot of progression in the storyline. There is a bit though, but it's quite minimal. And yeah, I think that's, for me, that's a bit of a shame, because I would have loved to gotten to know more about Mieruko and just have a bit of a story, because I feel like there's only so much you can do with this gag of, ooh, I'm not going to, whoa, the sun. Like, I hope these ghouls don't notice that I can see them. So yeah, we'll see. I wonder how the anime will turn out. Yeah, I think that's it. Also, yeah, the art does kind of like, at least the scary art, kind of like reminds me of, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly. I think he's Masaki Nakayama. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I have been looking into a lot of horror manga, just because, yeah, at this moment in time, I feel I am currently trying to focus on all the shoujo works and horror pieces, and the manga that, like, how would you call that? Intercepts, and also trying to kind of like keep up with the contemporary stuff as well, because, you know, I do like to have conversations with people, and I don't want to be continuously talking about stuff that no one really knows about. Anyway, with the horror stuff, I just quickly wanted to talk about this horror manga that I recently found, the artist as well, and I am a huge fan now. Okay, let me just get the manga. Where is it? Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, I love this one so much. Okay, so this is a manga called Tokimeki no Ikenie, which roughly translates to sacrifice of a heartthrob, or heartthrob, or heart. Oh my gosh, I can't say the word. Heartthrob sacrifice. Yeah, it's either it's either heartthrob sacrifice or sacrifice of a heartthrob, and it centers around this girl who is called Mari, and she is part of a family that is a bit weird. Nevertheless, she at school, together with her two best friends, is kind of like seen as the weirdos, and so nobody really pays much attention to them. And then you have this guy called Hana Mizuki, I believe, yeah, and he's this super popular dude. He's really cool. Everyone thinks he's like just awesome. Kakoi desu ne. Yeah, and so one day Mari is going back home, and she finds Hana Mizuki-kun just lying there on the floor covered in blood. Turns out he has been in a hit and run, and so she calls the ambulance and she stays with him until, you know, like the ambulance arrives and takes him away to the hospital. She's there as well, just to make sure that he is okay. And so when the nurse, I will also show you the second volume, how this one looks. So the nurse asks Mari for her name, and she kind of like freaks out, says, "No, I can't." And so she runs away, leaving behind her manga. And so when Hana Mizuki-kun wakes up, he's like, okay, who was the girl that helped me? And the nurse said like, yeah, well, I tried to ask for her name, but she didn't tell me, but she did leave this manga. So it's kind of like this Cinderella moment where he takes the manga, he goes to school, and he finds Mari in the hallway. And so he's back at school. Everyone's like, hey, Hana Mizuki-kun, like, how are you doing? And he's like, yeah, great. And then he zeroes in on Mari, walks straight to her, and he's like, here's your manga. Do you want to go out with me? And she's just like, I can't. So, turns out the reason why she is so distant is because her family is actually a kind of like a cult. They are murderers. They believe that they are the reason as to why the gods haven't come down and destroyed all humanity, and that's because they do human sacrifices. So there are a couple of rules in this family, in this cult, and one of the rules is that you can't get too close to other people, and under that, of course, falls you are not allowed to fall in love with people. So she actually does have a crush on Hana Mizuki, but yeah, she's like, in what position am I to date this guy when my entire family are murderers? So yeah, that's what the story is about. So it's a horror rom-com. Oh my gosh, it's like I didn't know that I needed this. Oh, it's just so good because it has so much gore, because it is actually, technically it's shonen, but the mangaka Sachiko Uguisu, she said, like, let's just make a shoujo horror manga instead. So yeah, technically it's a shonen, but in the mangaka's heart, it is a shoujo horror, and it's so good. One thing that I would love for more people to realize is that shoujo horror doesn't necessarily mean that it's not gory or it's not scary, because there is a lot of gore in this manga, as you can expect. I mean, there are people getting like decapitated, like swords taken to the face. There are some parts even that get blurred, so it's that graphic. So yeah, it's just a really great series, and I would highly recommend it. It's definitely one of my favorite horror series. Just in general, Uguisu's work is just really good. She also has this one shot of an isekai called Anaza Warudo and yeah, I won't spoil this one because it's like 13 pages, but it's about this guy who gets sent to another world. As you can imagine, it's an isekai, but it's an isekai written by a horror mangaka who knows nothing about isekai, did a tiny bit of research and just said, screw it, I'm just gonna do what I want to do. And it's the best thing ever. When I was streaming a couple of days ago, I recommended this to the chat, and there were a bunch of people who really enjoyed this. So hopefully you will too if you give it a try. I think that Uguisu is definitely one of the best horror mangaka artists out there in the scene. So yeah, hopefully it will get published traditionally in the English soon. I'll be making a video about it soon, about her soon, I mean. So yeah, I'll be going over more of her work, kind of like how her career has gone for the past 12 years. So yeah, what else do I want to talk about today? I don't think anything in particular. I just have like a lot of manga lying around in my room that I'm going to be getting to the next couple of weeks. I'm also preparing for my next semester in Japanese, and if everything goes well, by the end of June I should be like very fluent in reading Japanese, hopefully speaking as well, but I'm more interested in reading anyways. So I'll be able to go through these titles a bit quicker than I am right now, because it is a bit it's a bit frustrating at times when you don't really know a lot of words, but I find that once you focus on one series, it gets easier reading because they just use the same type of words, if that makes any sense. For instance, if you're reading something like Golden Kamui, you'll get a lot of vocabulary concerning weapons and the military and stuff like that. So yeah, we'll see. Okay, so the last segment is Ask Seji. So there are no questions because I never made this segment a thing, but I'm doing it now. So if you have a question or something you want to know my opinion about, which technically would also be a question, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy my content, you can help me out by liking, subscribing, hitting the bell button, commenting. If you want to help me even more, you can join my Patreon, where we have a Discord. We talk about manga, about literature, skating, etc., etc. Or also I have a coffee if you're not interested in Patreon. So all of that helps me so much. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you in another episode soon. Cheers!